People often ask me, if you're so invested in improving learning opportunities for kids, why on earth would you focus on school district central offices? And I tell them a couple of things. One of them is, educational research provides lots of different kinds of information. And it says some programs work and some programs don't. But probably the number one finding across all studies of educational research is that we don't get to learning results for kids at single schools or at scale when the central office doesn't participate in productive ways in implementing some of the great ideas we have for how to structure those learning environments for kids. So I focus on central offices because I think that's where our research is pointing to, and that central offices have been too often neglected. It's pretty clear to me it's going to take some concerted attention on the central office itself to help a central office perform better. I go all across the country talking to central office staff, observing their work, and I almost always see good people with their kind of eyes focused in the right direction, wanting to provide high quality services to schools, but they find themselves in systems that don't allow them to perform in those ways. So it's one of the things we've learned in our work is it's going to take a concerted effort that takes the central office as the unit of reform, and that takes central office reform as the reform. I've studied different kinds of educational improvement strategies that have tried to change the central office along the way of doing other things. For example, I did a study of the implementation of new small autonomous schools initiatives that involved, in a nutshell, making high schools smaller, creating smaller schools of all different kinds. And part of the theory of action was, if we create all these small schools, then that will somehow shine a light on how the central office needs to work differently. Similar theory of action with the school community partnership initiatives that I've studied. If we create these very different kinds of schools that involve deep partnerships with communities, that will somehow leverage changes in the central office bureaucracy from the bottom up. But as I asked in one of my publications, where is the up and bottom up reform? One of the things we've learned from districts that have taken central office change really seriously is that central office reform needs to be the reform. And leaders need to focus their resources on really thinking through how central offices can work very differently on behalf of schools and children. I think we're also seeing a new urgency to focus on the central office. Part of that urgency comes from federal and state policy. Just, 10 or 15 years ago, central offices were not expected to realize the kinds of results that they are now. So just 10 or 15 years ago, states were main actors in educational improvement. The federal government was. And districts were kind of ignored by policy. But now they're being held accountable for realizing meaningful improvements in teaching and learning across all their schools. And these demands kind of, hit them like a square peg in a round hole, because central offices were never set up to focus on teaching and learning in the ways that they're currently being asked to. So the policy environment really creates some significant urgency to really rethink the central office and how it works. We're also clearly in challenging budget times. The economy's challenging for all kinds of public and private institutions. And some central office leaders tell me, well, we'll get to central office improvement when the budget gets better. And what I tell them is, now's the time. The kinds of things we're learning about how to move a central office toward better performance are just the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about in tough budget times, in part because what they involve is moving beyond what I see a lot of superintendents doing right now, which is kind of skimming the top and cutting bits and pieces across the central office. That compromises central office performance in so many ways. What we're learning central office leaders should be thinking about is, okay, let's just sit down with a blank page and try to figure out, given the resource limits that we have, what can we build that's likely to realize results? Let's set aside what we currently have. Let's really expand our thinking and design the kind of system we wish we had to realize results for all students.